I wish we could delay the recording. Awesome. Seeing people join already. On-time machines. Hello, Manish. Welcome, everyone. Love all these on-time attendees. This is amazing. Awesome. We'll kick off here in a couple minutes. We're going to give everybody a little time to jump on. A short week can lead to a crammed Thursday afternoon, that's for sure.
No doubt.
Awesome. Still have a few joining. Excellent. All right. So we might go ahead and get ready to kick off. First of all, welcome. Happy Thursday to everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's conversation around peak season planning. Hard to believe that we are just kicking off summer and already thinking about our end of the year and just 6 months into 2022 already. It's really wild. I'm Trish. I'm the Chief of Staff for Advatics. I am here hosting with our marketing team as well. And of course, we are here hosting with two just extremely special guests. We have our very own Bill Teller, who is our Chief Operator here at Advatics. Bill was one of the original three that helped start our company, which is a little fun fact that not everybody knows. He has supported all of our clients in their operations and helped them to scale, process, improve, and prepare not only for peak seasons, but also successful day-to-day business. Bill's career has included more than 15 years of running operations at companies like Frito-Lay, as well as launching last mile station operations for Amazon and operations leadership at Rent the Runway and Ver. Bill, thanks for being here. I know you kind of have to, but I appreciate it. We all appreciate your expertise.
Great.
They made you an offer you couldn't refuse, Bill.
Yeah.
And that brings us to Mike. Mike Swartz, our guest panelist today. Mike is a retail veteran with a just extreme wealth of experience in e-commerce, digital disruption, and transformation. Mike was early stage Amazon, which means he learned to manage surges and hyper fast growth in real time. Sounds like planning was a luxury for Mike. So this is certainly a conversation he has learned trial by fire. He is known for his operational excellence and extreme efficiency, and honed these skills through not only companies like Amazon, but also Folica Inc., QVC, and Instacart, to name a few that we might all know, and is also a private consultant for high growth e-commerce businesses internationally. Mike, we are so thrilled to have you here. And as always, just appreciate your time and you sharing your just extreme knowledge and expertise for this industry. So thanks for being here. And
thanks for having me, Trish. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So guys, let's just dive in with the most basic, yet the biggest question that brings us all here. Where does one even begin with peak planning?
So, Bill, do you want to start with that, or should I take that?
Well, Mike, so that's a great question to start with. And I think also, one of the things that I want you to highlight is, what's the timing of peak planning? When should you start?
Yeah. Well, I think, the first question is, what is peak? I think every business has its own peak or multiple peaks throughout the year. If you are retail driven, everybody knows the Black Friday through Christmas peak, but a lot of retailers have different events throughout the year. So I think it's important to understand. I think a lot of retailers are also pushing some of their holiday sales into things like Christmas in July and Prime Day and things like that. So I think the first question is to just make sure you understand those critical dates. What are those critical peak events? Trish mentioned at QVC, we had peaks, multiple times a month sometimes. Our order volumes could fluctuate 10x within a month, depending on how much airtime we got. So that's the first thing, is make sure you have a really, I think, and it's a good best practice, is as operators, we have to be very, very close to the marketing and merchandising teams to understand what they have planned. The last thing you want to do is get caught short. Your question, Bill, about timing, I smiled a little bit when Trish said, here we are, it's just June, and we're thinking about holiday peaks. But when you think about the end-to-end supply chain, there are multiple peaks to prepare for that final day of shipping or the weeks of shipping. Many companies have their holiday plans locked in by June because receiving starts in the summertime and maybe earlier, depending on supply chain and import issues and so forth. So warehouses will start stocking. People will start doing a lot of planning around labor planning, finishing up projects. I think peak planning to me was always more of an annual process, less than it was an event. I think to people on the outside, they focus on the day, that final event, which is the shipping side. But there's the planning, there's the receiving, there's the event itself, which I always found was the easiest part of it all. And then one part I think that is also worth thinking about is, what do you do? Do you have a plan for after the event? You don't want to, you want to have a ramp down plan for things like labor and any rented equipment you might have had for the holidays and so forth. You really need to think full cycle if you're going to be successful with holiday planning.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's critical, because in some of the companies I've worked for and some of the clients that I've helped, there are different times throughout the year when peak happens for them. Like with Frito-Lay, when I was there, we had peak months in the summer because people go out and picnic and have chips and things of that nature. So, and then, there are other clients and places I've worked that had peak time frames at Christmas time, right? Mm-hmm. So those are critical things that you need to understand when you go into your planning processes. And I think what you mentioned about it being a process is very critical, because I know that some of the clients that I've worked with, struggle with that because they don't understand that it's a process, and they think of it as an event, and they only plan when it comes up to that part of the year. And planning for peak, in my opinion, happens much, much sooner. So, I don't know if there's, a specialized time frame on how long prior to the event, or how long prior you should plan. But I do know that for, Christmas time events like we are talking about now, we were planning, as early as May for peak. So I don't know if you have any thoughts around that as well.
Yeah, I think, one thing we haven't mentioned, and many companies come to realize that to be successful, you really need a sales and ops planning, or, S&OP process where instead of working independently, you are collaborating and working very closely with the finance team and the merchandise planners and production schedules and operation schedules. So most companies have not just a holiday sales and ops planning process, it's an annual cycle. It's something you practice throughout the year, so that these types of things are never a surprise. Timing, I think it really is supply chain driven, is it not, Bill? I mean, I work with a company in Turkey that's an apparel company, and most of their apparel is manufactured locally. So, in the US, we tend to import from, Asia and different parts of the world. So supply chain lead times are much different for apparel companies in the US than they are in a country like Turkey. So I don't think there is one. I think you kind of work backwards from your planning cycle, your purchase order cycle, your inbound supply chain lead times, and use that to guide your timeline planning.
Totally agree with that. So with that, Mike, when it comes to peak planning, what I like to do is create a playbook for our clients, and really, try to have certain deadlines and certain timelines. And then on top of that, certain tasks that have to happen within the playbook, so that the peak planning is done ahead of time. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts around a playbook, and if you've seen that in the past.
I think the idea of a playbook is a good one, because when I love these sports analogies, big Eagles fan. So for all of the Philadelphia gang on the call, big shout.
I'm a Cowboys fan, so I'm, Mike, we're sitting here butting heads.
You're going down this year. Sorry. I think developing a playbook, it's not something that you develop once and collects dust. It should be a way to capture knowledge and learn. You're going to make mistakes with it. You're going to evolve with it. But I think some of the elements will always remain the same, right? So, one question I get asked often is like, well, who should be involved to ensure that we have a successful holiday or a successful peak? And really, when you think about it, almost everybody has a part to play in this, right? So, the operations team clearly needs to know, the idea of a playbook. They need to know timing and logistics, how many people are coming in, when carrier schedules are going to change. Do they have to get aggressive with cross-training on critical roles, so that when they expand shifts or expand hours of operation, they've got enough trained people in the right roles? Transportation team needs to be involved to make sure that carrier pickup schedules are coordinated, and that your carriers know how much lift to expect. And do they even have the capacity? Maybe they need multiple carriers to handle your holiday volumes. HR and recruiting, obviously, they need to understand your ramp, your labor plans, how much variability you're planning for, what is your strategy for full-time, part-time, and flex labor. I think Trish, we could probably spend an hour just talking about labor planning, it's such a critical thing. And, especially post-COVID with what the cost of labor, the competition for labor, really getting creative and attracting people to work your schedules is quite a challenge, and it's more sometimes than just offering them pay. It's, are you offering them work conditions? Are you offering them flexible work schedules? How well are you meeting their labor needs? But HR and recruiting play a massive role in making sure that you have enough people in the right times of the day, the right days of the week, and that you're managing things like attrition. So HR and recruiting is a big partner in this. Engineering, you may have engineering projects. You need to make sure that if you're installing new material handling systems, are they locked down and working properly in time for your holiday demand? You don't want to be debugging or doing stress testing on equipment when you need it the most for your customers. The facilities team, all the logistics that go in with ramping up people, do you have enough break room facilities? Do you have to get creative with scheduling for food? Are you going to be offering days where you're giving free food? Do you have adequate parking? Are you offering bus services? Do you have spare parts inventory? I mean, there's a million things that go in with facilities planning that can ensure a smooth holiday. I used to always insist that we did proactive maintenance well in advance of the holidays, replacing drive motors and things before they fail so that they don't fail during critical needs. Training, having enough people to train, interviewing. Do you have enough time in the day if you're using your supervision or your management team to help with the interviewing process? You need to make sure that that's coordinated in a way that you're not asking them to be interviewing when you need them the most on the floor. So I think you should also look externally. I mentioned carriers as one external supplier, but you might also want to look at your consumables, your packaging suppliers, tape, label, shrink wrap, pack slips, printed labels, all that kind of stuff. You really need to think like end to end, because it's the little things that will kill you, right? Like you can have the most sophisticated fulfillment center in the world, but if you run out of shipping labels, you're dead in the water. So I kind of went off on a tangent there, Bill. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine, Mike. And I think you touched on a lot of the things that I have jotted down from our playbook that we've created, that we help our clients with. In terms of that, our playbook is just a skeleton. And when we go into clients, we really, take what they're doing and really incorporate that into a playbook and create that for them. So I think you've touched on a lot of that stuff. The one thing that I would call it, actually, there's a couple of things, but the first thing I want to call out is safety planning around peak time frame. And I think that's very critical because, when you have a lot of new individuals within your building, there becomes an increased risk around safety. And I think the training from that is very critical. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments around that as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's, I think safety is one of those things that the longer you're in this business, you're eventually going to experience firsthand a very unpleasant thing. There's a lot of potential energy in a warehouse. Things fall at 32 feet per second squared. So when they hit the ground with a thud when they're 32 feet in the air, right? So, and there's even things closer to the ground that have a lot of potential energy, pallets standing on end, forklifts that weigh thousands of pounds. So the last thing you want to do is ever hurt somebody because they're feeling the stress or pressure of a holiday, right? So those things, I think, Bill, your greatest defense for that is having a strong safety culture all year long, because, no matter how much you try to orient people and do your best to protect them, your best protection is the person working next to you that knows your business and says, hey, that's not how we do things here. We don't stand on pallets. We don't crawl under conveyors. We don't stand on one leg on a ladder to free a jam box or something like that. So I do think orientation and making safety a priority, and make it part of your daily stand-up, make it part of your daily reminder. But your best defense is how strong safety is as part of your culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the comments you made a little while ago, Mike, about the playbook not being something that just sits on a shelf that you dust off every year, because I think at the end of peak, you need to have a post-mortem, right, to go over the best practices that worked extremely well. And then on top of that, the failures that happen during peak, because there always are, right? It doesn't matter how well you plan, there's going to be something that doesn't go quite right. And you need to make sure that you're working on action items for the next peak. So you don't just put it on the shelf, you got to keep it going. It's a living model that needs to be worked on year round. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments around the postmortem.
I have a few. Yeah. One of my roles during my tenure at Amazon was I was leading the operational excellence team. So all of the Lean Six Sigma problem solving. And we treated the holidays as our stress test. And it really was part of an annual cycle. So during holidays, myself and my team would get deployed into the FCs. And part of our job, in addition to like leading different parts of the operations, we kept an ongoing log of failures. We lived in the weeds. Lean and Six Sigma people were always looking at the defect rates and looking at what didn't go right. And it was pretty typical, Bill, to come out of a holiday with 200 to 300 project ideas. Even with a company as well-funded and well-run as Amazon, there's always lots of room to improve. And I think it's really a good best practice to make observation and recording of things that aren't perfect or things that fail part of your routine during holiday. There's no better time to test that than under full load, right? Even if you do stress testing, and I know, Bill, you want to touch on stress testing.
That's the next topic.
Yeah, even stress testing, stress testing to me is like the difference between running a 100-yard dash and running a marathon, right? A stress test is the 100-yard dash. You're trying to see what might go wrong, but you don't know what really is going to fail until you commit things to stress for a long period of time. The fatigue that wears in, all the unexpected things that can happen, snowstorms, weather events, COVID, pick a disaster. There's always one, right? But I think it's really important to have at least a person or a group of individuals responsible for like capturing things that aren't right. Make good use of photographs, video, document, create a shared file, whatever you have to do. But you want to capture the pain in the moment as best you can during your holiday. And that becomes the fuel for your post-holiday debrief.
That's right, Mike. And then from the post-mortem, there always is an action log and a project plan that comes out of that you're going to be working on, hopefully for the next year, to get prepared for the next peak. So I think that's very critical. And since we brought up stress tests, that is the next topic that I wanted to discuss. And it's always important in my mind to really, stress test your environment to understand where your gaps are. And then you create a post-mortem after that as well to be able to create the action log and the project plan from that. And some of the things that I jotted down that you've already brought up, Mike, is parking. One of the things that wasn't brought up is shift changes. And I know we've worked with some clients recently that have or really managed shift changes in a very poor way, in my opinion, that has cost them a lot of money. What you do during a stress test is look for the bottlenecks, right? to make sure that you can have some action items to work through those before peak actually arrives. So I want your thoughts on stress testing, how you plan for them, what they look like, and then what comes after.
Yeah, I'm going to hit two things, Bill, because you mentioned shift changes, and I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, but I'll talk about stress testing first, if you like.
Yep.
Vince Lombardi had a great quote that I love. It's practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect.
Right.
Or he said something like that. It's close to that. And what I love about that is stress testing to me it should not be a single event. It should be a string of events. And wherever you can, you want to create scenarios where people are operating under like game time situation, right? I'll give you an example. I was once in an FC that had 7 shipping lines, and I was observing them about this time of year. It was the summertime, and one line would fail, and the whole crew would just shift over to the other line, and then something would go wrong with that line. They just shift to the next line. And I brought the GM over and I showed him what I was seeing, and I said, "Look, you're not helping your team prepare for holiday, because when this happens under peak, every one of those lines that goes down is lost production, lost forever when you're running at capacity." So what I convinced him to do was mothball each day the number of machines that weren't necessary for the day's volume. And a lot of interesting things started to come out of that. First people were like, "Well, this is crazy. We should just shift over to the other line." I'm like, "No, you got to learn how to manage this thing," right? So things started to happen, like they started to get more proactive about maintaining the print heads and the things that might go wrong with the equipment. They put a mechanic's workstation up there with some of the spare parts. They made sure that they had people trained and established SLAs for responding to calls for the machines when they failed. So all of that was meant not just to be, difficult or mean to the operators. It was to teach them how to be ready for game time.
Yep.
So that we wouldn't lose production when we needed it the most. That's just one example. I think there's lots of ways you can simulate stress tests, right? You can constrain time. In the example I just gave you, you can constrain equipment. You can say work with less. You could also constrain time and say that, we're going to run this operation. We have 4 hours worth of work. We have an 8-hour schedule. We're going to use 4 hours to do projects or cleanup, and then we're going to run like hell for 4 hours, right? I would suggest you do that during the first 4 hours, just in case you need the time later. But it's another way to create stress, is to constrain time, constrain equipment, try the best you can to simulate game time scenarios.
Absolutely. I jotted down some things, from my perspective. When you're doing a stress test, it needs to be at least 4 hours long, if not more. I would prefer it be a shift long, but sometimes that's not doable because of volume, et cetera. But I think that's critical. And then on top of that, Mike, you had mentioned that, when you lose time, you lose it for a long time. And so what I like to do specifically around the shift changeovers, is to get off to a fast start. And I think we've talked about this in the past. Fast starts are critical, in my opinion. What's your thoughts around that?
Oh, absolutely. It's especially for anybody that has, more than 100 people on a shift. It's amazing. If you want to save money and improve your metrics real quickly, start by looking at what happens at the end and the beginning of your shifts, and do the math. If you have 200 people on the payroll and they're wasting 20, 30 minutes of their time, that is, that's what's 30 minutes times 200 people. That's
A lot of
100
money.
hours of wasted time. I do the math. We'll slow
Right.
it down. It's 100 hours of wasted time just in one changeover. And you start adding that up and looking at what that adds up to in a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis. I know companies that actually train their leadership teams on how to have very effective 5-minute startup meetings. So you're right. It's like setting that tone, but it's also about not wasting time that you can't recover later. And again, it's kind of like the conversation we had about around safety, Bill. It's a cultural thing, right? If you practice that way and create that kind of expectation year round, then it's not a shock to the system when the holidays come and there's a lot of pressure to perform, because it's just the way we work, right? You want to make that a habit, not something we only do during the holidays.
Absolutely. Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit, Mike, and talk a little bit about technology. And, what are some of the best practices around technology during peak time? For example, one of the things that we've always practiced is that there's a lockout time frame or period, right, during peak, that you don't want to make any changes from a tech standpoint. So that's one of the best practices, but I'm sure there's more.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really big open-ended statement.
I set you up for success, my friend.
So those lockdown periods, companies are always pushing the envelope on their tech changes, right? Changes to their warehouse management systems, workflows, what have you. But the fact is, software technology is seldom perfect first time you do a rollout, right? There's always some technical debt there. So I think depending on the scope and the impact of the software changes that you're making, that should dictate how far out you want to allow burn-in or refinement, or people just getting comfortable with the new workflows and new software. You and I both know that companies that try to introduce new warehouse management systems on the eve of their holidays, it's almost a guaranteed recipe for disaster, right? You're introducing new ways of work, new disciplines, and if people aren't ready for it, the last thing you want to do is add the stress of a holiday volume to an already complicated environment. So I think if you have kind of rule of thumb, they say it takes 22 days to create or break a habit. So if you have a well-oiled machine, I would give myself at least 22 days or a month moratorium on any changes prior to adding the stress of volume to a situation. If it's broader, 90 days is not unheard of if you're introducing something like a warehouse management system, or you have a very complex material handling system integration or something like that. So I think the answer is, and this is like a Six Sigma answer, it depends. Is the right answer. It depends really on the complexity and scope.
Gotcha. One of the things that you had brought up earlier, and I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper, Mike, is the plan for hiring and going into labor planning.
Yeah.
So, I know that during peak time frame, that's critical. And, you kind of have to back into that from your forecast. However, there are some pitfalls with that, with your hiring and labor planning. What are some of the best practices around that?
Another 1-hour topic, Bill. I think the thing to realize about forecasting is that by definition, they're wrong 100% of the time. Because you're forecasting averages typically, right? And operations work not in averages, we work in absolutes, right? What's presented to us today? What do we have to get done today? Forecasts are always over or short. And when I was leading operations, I really worked hard with my teams to not let forecasting become an excuse. You know, when operations would miss a number, maybe they had too much labor. Well, the excuse was, well, you over forecasted. I had too many people. And if the forecast came in higher than expected, it was like, well, if you'd have told us, we would have been ready for it. You know, like it was always a ready-made excuse. And I didn't have any patience for that. And so what I really try to understand when I'm working with teams and forecasts is not just the average, but let's understand what it is we're forecasting and what level of precision we have and how much variability we need to be able to respond to. That to me is more important, you know, except that forecasts are going to be wrong all the time. So how have you constructed your workforce based on your service level requirements, your assumptions around attendance, attrition, how many people you can get in, how much extra capacity do you have in equipment? The plan really should not be around a number. It should be around a band, you know, like, hey, I can flex up or I can flex down this amount in this is really important, within this time frame. Yep. So a good labor plan says, it's what am I going to staff for on average, and how much can I cut if I need to because I'm overstaffed? How much can I add if I'm understaffed within a shift, within a day, within 3 days, within a week? That's a good labor plan that says, you know, I have other strategies here based on my assumptions around what I need for full-time staff, part-time staff, flex staff, arrangements with agencies, excess capacity that I've built into my technology and so forth. It should be not around a specific number, but around, you know, that barn door that you're working with for planning purposes. I think the other thing to understand is, you know, as I said, the level of precision. And I remember a company I used to work for, there's this ongoing debate between operations and the planning team. The planning team would high five themselves and say, hey, we're 99.9% accurate this month for the month. Like, right. Okay.
It could vary by day though, right?
Yeah, well, the operations team was taking that monthly forecast, breaking it into weeklies, breaking it into dailies, and then trying to break it into shifts. And it's like each level of precision has its band of variation around it. So it's, you know, that interpolation or extrapolation of data can be deadly if you don't really understand variability. So I think the short answer on that question is you first need to understand variation in terms of incoming order volume and how variable and how flexible are your production capacities to meet those variable incoming demands. And I think the other piece of this too is understanding your SLAs. And do you have different SLA requirements during different times of the year? You know, if you're going to be really, you know, world class, you've got to respond to all the variations on a daily basis. Some companies get comfortable carrying, you know, a day or two or sometimes more backlog. That can help also if you have a very highly variable environment. But the more you try to match the incoming variation with your labor plans, the better you have to be. It goes up exponentially, your skill level for that.
Absolutely, Mike. And I think, you know, based on what you just said, I agree. Forecasting really is just something that gets you in the ballpark, right? You want to make sure that at least you have some sort of path to shoot for. But I guess, you know, based on that, you know, you have to have flexibility within your labor pool to be able to, you know, adjust up or down when necessary, based on the forecast fluctuations. And then on top of that, you know, what are some of the best practices that you've seen and been a part of around the temp staffing companies?
Well, the best practices I've been part of had nothing to do with temp staffing companies.
Okay.
I had an experience once where I had 1,200 employees on my payroll, and we were in the unemployment rate was around 4 or 5% in the area I was working in. And I had a highly variable environment. My order volumes on any given day could fluctuate from 15,000 to 130,000 orders in a day. And we had single events that could generate a million orders in one single day. And the company's SLA was unwavering. You had to ship within 24 hours. So the most success I had, the reason I had 1,200 employees was because most of those people were on call. They were flex scheduled. And we had built our own strategies around this flex labor force. What we learned was that the first thing we did was we unpacked what the definition of unemployment, like who was in the statistic and who was not.
Yep.
And we learned that retirees, homemakers, and students were the big categories of people that were not considered in that census. And we wanted to attract them as workers. So we did workshops, we went into the community, we tried to learn what was most important to them. And there were a couple of things that stuck out. One was they wanted employee discounts on merchandise, which was easy. Second thing was they wanted control and flexibility over their work schedules because they had all kinds of different requirements. A stay-at-home mom simply said, listen, I want to see my kid get on the bus. I want to see them get off the bus. I want to be there for family dinner, and I want to put them to bed, and I'll work any other time. Students wanted flexibility to prepare for exams and papers and things like that. Retirees wanted to work, but not all the time. So, what we did was we looked at the customer, in this case, with these groups of workers, and we tried to construct a work environment that matched their needs. And that's why I in that environment, I had, it was around 4 or 5 people to net 1 FTE. And it was quite an education, and it was far more productive than working with an agency. It was a lot cheaper. And it was, even with all of our administrative costs for hiring and planning and everything else that went with that. Yep. We partnered with, at the time, the company was planning customer service and phone reps on the half hour. So we partnered with their team. They were, really numbers driven, and used them to help us forecast outbound orders by day, by program type. So the very best experience I had, Bill, had nothing to do with an agency. Had everything to do with us understanding our customer, customizing work schedules and work arrangements around their needs, and really managing it very closely.
I totally agree, Mike. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question on my list here, and it's actually, we actually got a question about carriers. When it comes to carriers, I know one of the companies that I was working closely with this past peak struggled immensely with carrier planning and, ensuring that, they got drivers and trucks and trailers on time. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts around that, and based on, your experiences, what are some of the best practices around carriers?
Are you talking about like air freight or over the road carriers, or what are you thinking?
My Wi-Fi just froze up, Mike. I apologize. I didn't hear.
Oh, okay. I said, when you talk about transportation, are you talking about, I'm assuming you're talking about outbound or inbound?
Outbound.
Okay.
Yeah.
Outbound transportation. And was it air or was it ground, or what were you looking at?
Yeah. So, a lot of the problems that this client experienced was just the timeliness of getting the carriers there. And that could have been because of planning. It could have been because of the carriers just being late. But I know, with COVID, things have changed quite a bit around carriers. Shortfalls in drivers, shortfalls in trucks and trailers. These things are happening now. And I didn't know if there were some best practices that you could get ahead of that.
Yeah. Well, if you get to know me, Bill, and I think you do, that one of my themes is managing variation, right? And I think one of the things that happens with carriers, just like, what happens inside the four walls happens outside the four walls, right? There are unexpected things that come up. And if you are running a facility full tilt, your door, you have to turn doors quickly. One way to deal with that variation is to hire or to have your own yard jockey and to have a staging area for trailers either on campus or off campus. So one way you can keep your building flowing and deal with some of those carrier disruptions is to manage the removal of your trailer from the dock to a staging area. Now there's all kinds of controls you want to put in place in terms of sealing trailers and making sure you're coordinated with the carrier in terms of them taking ownership for something that they haven't touched, manifesting and all those other legality things. But one way to keep your building flowing is to have a system to make sure that trucks flow freely from your docks so that doesn't become a constraint for your building. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but I guess if you're having over the road lift capabilities, then that's something I would go to my transportation people and say, listen, we need more carriers, we need more alternatives because our customers are suffering with service.
Absolutely, Mike. And I think you touched on one part of that, and that's, having a yard jockey, I believe, is critical, and or having enough yard jockeys because, as peak comes on, there's more trailers that have to be moved, right? And it's all about time studies and really understanding how many trailers a yard jockey can move in an hour, and really understanding how many of those that you need to be able to make sure that you keep the operation running at all times. Because once you said, or one time you said, lost time is lost for forever. You can't get that back. So I just, want to make sure that that topic was brought up.
No, it's a good one. And if you're dealing with large retailers, and I've worked with some of the largest, the other thing that can become complicated is if you are behind on your inbound trailers as well. So
that's right.
You think about systems. It's not just systems inside your facility. It's having adequate yard management systems and just like you have a locator system for products inside the warehouse. Yep. You better have controls over trailer storage, trailer staging, lots and lots of time, and many times customer delays can happen because you can't find the right trailer or the wrong trailers get moved. So having a yard management system, if you're in that scenario, is essential.
Absolutely. Mike, I know I've asked you a lot of questions. Thank you so much for all those answers. It's been fantastic.
Sure. I feel like I skimmed the surface. There's a lot of each of those topics is actually quite detailed.
We could go, we certainly could go deeper in a lot of the topics. I mean, I have a lot of bullet points on each one of these, but those are our conversations for each one of them for sure.
Yeah, I think there's an overarching theme, I think, to holiday or any kind of peak planning is I think you really need to think full system, in terms of all the players and what they need to be a good team player in the whole process, right? So we talked about some of the ones that directly involve the operations, but I think you also should be thinking about like the internal communications with all of your work associates, right? Your leaders need to know, shop leads need to know, the the team needs to know, I think when people understand, and the more you can engage people at all levels in the organization, the more it feels like we than us and them. And I just always found that it's impossible to over communicate. It's impossible to overshare. And the more that you can engage people everybody that's involved, the better off you will be. This is not something that's done in a vacuum, that's for sure.
I totally agree, Mike. And, that from my perspective is critical, and it should be a part of your playbook. And again, we said it, the playbook is not something that sits on a shelf. It has to be worked on year round to have very good peak seasons. It goes into the planning. It goes into the postmortems that you had from the previous peak and your stress test, and really creating those action logs and being able to have, a project planning team that goes through all those and making sure that they get finished or accomplished. And I think that will help you alleviate some of the pitfalls that you're going to have during the peak season. And it's just critical. So
yeah, I think there is a recipe. And I think, whenever you're constructing these communications, these comms, the very first thing you should address is why. Why is this important? Why is this important to the business? Why is this important to our customers? Let's all understand the ramifications of this so that we have a compelling reason why we're going to put ourselves through the stress of a holiday peak, right? What does it mean to the business financially? What does it mean to how many customers you're serving? You want to frame it in a way that you create a story that's bigger than any individual on the team. They need to, I think, feel a sense of purpose that goes way beyond. My days at Amazon, the battle cry was always work hard, have fun, make history. And
here.
And the make history part was kind of motivating because you really felt like you were doing something that hadn't been done before, and got us through a lot of really tough skids.
Yep.
But giving people the courtesy and the respect to share that perspective is something that's often overlooked. I think the other thing is tying then the reason why into what the targets are for the department and how each person's job contributes to that target is also a super important part of the message, and maybe one that gets carried on by the local leadership. I think it's also important in that planning and that communication to let people know how we're going to be measuring success, how we're going to be evaluating it at the end. What does success look like? And what metrics are we going to be using daily to talk about how people love to keep score, right? Everybody's a little bit competitive. So I think letting people know how we're going to keep score is really, really important. And I think a best practice I'll share with you, Bill, is during these peak periods, I learned a lesson early in my career. I went through a very, very tough time, worked a lot of hours, and out of the blue, I had a boss wrote a letter to my wife. We were newly married. I was working crazy hours, and he sent her a letter and a check. And he said, hey, this is for you. Just want you to know that, we appreciate the work that Mike's doing, and we really appreciate the support he's getting from home. So I'd like you to go out and, treat yourself, because we appreciate Mike, but we also appreciate you. And it made such a huge impact on my wife and on me that I've never forgotten that. And I've tried whenever I have the opportunity to do that. And just writing a note, sending somebody a gift certificate at home, thanking them. Everybody has somebody that they miss or that they are counting on. And it can be a loved one, it could be a grandparent, a mother, a father, it doesn't matter, a roommate even, who knows? But acknowledging that when the people you're asking to put in a lot of time are really taking time away from somebody else, I have found that that is such a rewarding thing to keep in mind. It makes a huge impact, and it takes stress off of your teammate. Like, you don't always know the pressure they're getting from home about, do they care about you? They're working you like a dog, all of that. So I think remembering those support systems is also really key to having a successful holiday.
Mike, I totally agree with that. And that's, a very great topic. I know me and my wife have been through many, many peaks now, and peak time is very stressful, and your spouse takes it in a very tough way sometimes. And that pat on the back from them, because they are the help and support from the home standpoint, it's critical. It's absolutely critical. So I think that pat on the back is absolutely a great thing.
Yeah. And I think, the more sincere and specific you are with that communication, the more it will resonate. And it's just worth spending a few minutes to do that. And the money is usually insignificant, but it's the acknowledgement of the support and the acknowledgement of the person that you're not taking them for granted. It goes a long way. So
absolutely. And then, Mike, you also brought up something, and I know we need some time for questions and answers here, so I'm going to stop right here. But KPIs, metrics, dashboards, those are very important. You need to be following those every hour to make sure that you're attaining your goals and targets. And that's a whole nother subject that we could talk about for a long time, but I'm going to stop right there.
That's a 2-hour discussion.
That's right.
A much longer one. Yeah.
So Trish, are there any other questions at this point in time?
I think that my dogs have decided they have some questions, but I think that actually wraps us up. And I think that's a really wonderful note to end the conversation on. As I think we've all heard today, there is an endless amount of discussion we could have about this deeply impactful season and the general surge that we all experience, and we know all too well. So thank you both. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your time and your energy and your expertise. And Bill, thank you so very much for your questions and for just driving this conversation. This was really awesome. And again, just can't believe we are halfway through 2022.
That's a scary thought.
It is terrifying. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Were there any questions that came in, or do we?
You guys answered them along the way. So
okay,
that was great. Yeah, we answered them throughout the conversation. So thank you for that. Anybody from the audience, anything, we'll give a couple seconds here. If you have anything in the chat to drop in, otherwise we can call it a Thursday.
It is Thursday. Wow.
It is. I know. Again, these short weeks, they really throw it all off. Awesome. Well, very good. We really look forward to seeing you all next time. Stay tuned for our next webinar coming soon.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.